I never imagined that the day my own children would try to commit me would be the same day I would finally understand the true meaning of betrayal. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 72 years old, and I always believed my life was an open book, filled with chapters of love, dedication, and a family I considered unshakable. But on that sunny Tuesday, in my cozy living room in Atlanta, Georgia, the book was torn to pieces. David, my eldest son, a successful lawyer with a smile that always melted my heart, stood before me, his expression grim. Beside him, Sarah, my sweet daughter, whom I taught to walk and to dream, seemed strangely distant, her blue eyes once full of affection, now dull and evasive. "Mom," David began, his voice soft, but with a firmness that sent shivers down my spine, "we need to talk about your well-being. We think it would be best for you to spend some time in a specialized clinic." The word clinic echoed in my mind like a death knell. It wasn't an invitation, it was a sentence. I felt my heart, which had already endured so much joy and sorrow, clench painfully. The idea of losing my freedom, of being confined by those I loved most, was terrifying. I felt betrayed, cornered, and heartbroken. Tears began to well up in my eyes, but I held them back. They expected despair, but what they would find was a strength neither they nor I knew existed. My tear-filled eyes subtly shifted to the small, almost imperceptible dark spot in the upper corner of the bookshelf. That tiny lens was my only witness, my silent ally. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal or the anguish of being underestimated, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love to know where you all are. To understand that moment of horror, one must go back in time and understand the woman I became. I, Eleanor Vance, was not a fragile, naive old lady. Life had taught me to be observant, to read between the lines, and above all, to protect myself. After years working as an accountant, dealing with numbers and people, I developed a keen intuition for detecting patterns and anomalies. It wasn't paranoia, it was prudence. The seed of my foresight was planted a few years ago when I began to notice small changes in David and Sarah's behavior. They weren't big things, just subtleties. A sudden excessive interest in my finances, veiled questions about my will, suggestions about how I should simplify my life and rest. I loved them unconditionally, but a mother's love also makes her a detective. I realized that behind their facade of concerned children, there was a different glint in their eyes, a glint of convenience, perhaps even greed. That's when I decided to act. Not confrontational, but silently and shrewdly. I installed discreet security cameras in strategic points around the house, not just for protection against external intruders, but to record any suspicious movement within my own home. It was a hidden defense, an invisible safety net I hoped I would never need to use. But deep down, a part of me knew that, with the growing pressure on my independence and their insistence on taking care of me, the day my defenses would be tested was near. They underestimated my foresight, mistaking my age for fragility, my calmness for ignorance. My fear transformed into a silent, astute strategy, and every thread of that web was now in its proper place. Back in the living room, David and Sarah's intervention intensified. David, with his polished lawyer's voice, listed a series of incidents that, according to him, proved my mental confusion. The time I forgot where I put my car keys, which he himself had moved, the pot I left on the stove for a few extra minutes while Sarah distracted me with an urgent conversation, and even my refusal to sell the family home, which, to them, was a burden. "Mom, it's for your own good," Sarah interjected, her voice muffled by false emotion. "We just want you to be safe, to have the best possible care." I watched them, maintaining an expression of pain and confusion, exactly what they expected. But inside, a storm of cold anger and determination simmered. Every word, every lie, every manipulation was new data, a new recording for the small, hidden lenses. I could feel the warmth of the cameras silently working, capturing the truth behind that charade. The pressure mounted. They had brought forms, commitment papers, and even a man in a white coat who introduced himself as Dr. Miller, a geriatric specialist. He asked me simple questions, which I answered with the calculated hesitation of someone cornered. They believed they were in control, that their trap was perfect, but they didn't know that, as they spoke, every word, every gesture was being meticulously archived, not just in my memory, but in a place where the truth could not be distorted. Their carefully orchestrated plan was about to unfold in a way they could never have predicted. Dr. Miller, with a condescending smile, tried to persuade me with technical terms about specialized care and therapeutic environment. His eyes, however, showed no concern, but rather a calculated haste. David and Sarah approached, one on each side, as if ready to escort me. I felt the cold touch of David's hand on my arm, a gesture that, in other circumstances, would be affectionate, but now was one of restraint. "Mom, please don't make this harder," Sarah whispered, her voice almost inaudible but with a hint of impatience. I took a deep breath, allowing a single tear to roll down my cheek. It was the performance they expected, the frail, elderly mother, resigned to her fate. With every step I took towards the door, with every word they uttered, I felt the energy of my cameras, silently recording everything. My apparent submission was, in fact, a tactic. I needed them to feel secure, to believe they had won, so that the fall would be even greater. The Tsar, a black SUV with tinted windows, waited at the entrance of my house on the quiet tree-lined street in Atlanta. Two burly men whom I had never seen before opened the back doors. They weren't nurses, but security guards, with empty stares and rigid postures. The sight of the vehicle and those men confirmed my worst suspicions. It wasn't a clinic. It was a prison. But as I got into the car with what dignity I had left, my fear turned into a cold, calculated rage. They had underestimated the woman who raised them, the woman who always taught them about justice and character. Their plan had been meticulously executed, but they didn't know that I had already planted the seeds of their own ruin. On the way to the clinic, the silence in the car was almost deafening, broken only by David's whispered instructions to the driver. Sarah avoided my gaze, nervously fiddling with her phone. I, on the other hand, was calm, observing every detail of the passing landscape, memorizing every curve, every sign. My mind, far from being confused, was sharper than ever. We arrived at a modern, impersonal building, surrounded by a high wall and security gates. There were no blooming gardens or inviting benches, just concrete and glass. Upon entering, I was led to a cold waiting room where David and Sarah sat, still with their expressions of false concern. That's when I decided to make my move. "David, dear," I said, my voice soft but with a clarity that made him look up. "Do you remember that old pocket watch of your grandfather's? The one he gave me on my 60th birthday?" David frowned, confused. "Yes, Mom. What about it?" "Well, I left it on my dresser on the second floor. It's a family heirloom, very valuable. Could you please go get it for me? I don't want it to get lost." Sarah quickly interjected, "Mom, don't worry about that now. We'll take care of everything." But I insisted, with a tone of voice that mixed fragility with a hint of stubbornness. "No, Sarah, it's very important to me. Please, David, it's the only thing I ask." David hesitated, but the idea of an invaluable piece unprotected at home and the apparent fragility of my plea convinced him. "All right, Mom, I'll go get it." He stood up, visibly annoyed, and left. Sarah remained, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The pocket watch was a distraction. What I really wanted was David back at the house, where my cameras continued to record. David's absence created a crack in Sarah's facade. She tried to maintain composure, but her anxiety was palpable. I, on the other hand, remained calm, observing her with a serenity that made her uneasy. About an hour later, David returned, the pocket watch in his hand, but with an expression of shock and fury on his face. He didn't say a word, just handed me the watch and sat down heavily. "What happened, David?" Sarah asked, noticing the drastic change in her brother. David looked at me, his eyes burning with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Mom, what is this? What are these things?" He pulled a small USB device from his pocket, which I had strategically left in a visible spot next to the watch. It was the flash drive with the camera recordings. "They are the memories of our family, David," I replied, my voice now firm and without any trace of fragility. "The memories you tried to erase, the truths you tried to hide." David connected the flash drive to his tablet, and the screen came to life. The first image that appeared was of him and Sarah talking to Dr. Miller in my living room even before I entered. The audio, crystal clear, revealed the plan, the division of my assets, the sale of the house, the clinic as a facade to isolate me. Sarah paled, her face contorted in horror and denial. "No, Mom, this is a setup. You're delusional." David, however, was silent, his eyes fixed on the screen, watching himself and his sister plotting against me. The recording continued, showing cruel moments, whispered words, the coldness of their intentions. Their plan failed miserably, not because I was weak, but because I was smarter, more prepared. The truth, recorded and irrefutable, was now before them, exposing the cruelty of their actions. The silence in the cold clinic waiting room was broken only by the muffled sound of the recording, which continued to expose the sordidness of David and Sarah's plan. Dr. Miller, who had until then maintained a professional demeanor, began to sweat, his eyes darting from the screen to me, then to David and Sarah like a cornered rat. Sarah, in a fit of rage and despair, tried to snatch the tablet from David's hands. "No, Mom, this is a lie. You're incriminating us. This is illegal." I stared at her, my voice firm and imbued with an authority she hadn't heard in years. "Illegal, Sarah? What's illegal is trying to confine your own mother, steal her assets, and destroy her life for greed. What's illegal is the conspiracy you concocted with the help of this doctor here." Dr. Miller tried to intervene, stammering flimsy excuses about misunderstandings and preliminary evaluations. David, for his part, was pale, his confident lawyer's mask completely shattered. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and fear, realizing the extent of my preparation. "I'm not delusional, David, and I'm not alone." I stood up, my posture erect, and looked directly at Dr. Miller. "You, sir, will be the first to face the consequences. I have all your conversations recorded from your first contact with my children, where you clearly articulated a plan to illegally incapacitate me. The medical board and the Atlanta police will be very interested in hearing this." Panic seized Dr. Miller's face. Sarah began to cry hysterically, realizing that their house of cards was collapsing. David, the strategist, the manipulator, was speechless, his legal mind desperately trying to find a way out that didn't exist. The trap they had set for me was now closing in on them. The scene at the clinic quickly turned into controlled chaos. I, Eleanor Vance, was no longer the victim, but the architect of my own justice. With the recording as irrefutable evidence, the police were called. Dr. Miller was arrested on the spot, facing serious charges of fraud and conspiracy. David and Sarah, in turn, were taken in for questioning, their careers and reputations in tatters. That day, which should have been the beginning of my confinement, became the day of my liberation and their downfall. In the days that followed, the truth came out. The house, my assets, my freedom, everything was legally secured. David and Sarah tried to defend themselves, claiming genuine concern and misunderstandings, but the recordings were relentless. The community, which once saw them as exemplary children, now viewed them with disdain. The news spread quickly, not just in Atlanta, but throughout Georgia, a cautionary tale about greed and the underestimation of a mother. I didn't seek revenge, but justice. The poetic justice of seeing those who tried to destroy me face the consequences of their own actions. There was no joy in their pain, only a deep sadness for the loss of a family I thought I had, but at the same time, a sense of relief and a new beginning. Their plan failed miserably, not just because I had secret cameras, but because love and character, in the end, always prevail over malice and greed. My home, once a place of betrayal, was now a sanctuary of peace and dignity. Months have passed since that fateful day. Life, like a river, found its new course. The house, my home for decades, was filled again with sunlight and tranquility. I, Eleanor Vance, was no longer the old lady my children tried to discard, but a woman who, at 72, had rediscovered her strength, her intelligence, and her worth. David and Sarah. They faced the consequences of their choices. Their careers were shaken, their reputations tarnished. I haven't seen them since, and there's no emptiness in my heart because of it. The real loss wasn't theirs, but mine, in realizing that the children I raised with so much love and sacrifice didn't share the values I worked so hard to instill in them. But paradoxically, this loss brought me invaluable clarity. I learned that the true legacy we leave is not material possessions, but the character we cultivate and the values we uphold. That day, which should have been the darkest of my life, became the most revealing. It showed me that resilience has no age, that a mother's intuition is a force to be reckoned with, and that sometimes the worst pains lead us to the greatest discoveries about ourselves and the world. My secret cameras recorded the truth, but it was my heart that guided me to freedom. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the strength of character and the justice that life sometimes delivers, share this video. And remember, never underestimate the wisdom and strength of a mother.